I had the ballad in my hands when my grandson squeezed my fingers tightly. "Grandma, don't look now, but she's back. She's there." His voice came out in a whisper, but it was as if time had frozen inside the community hall. The air, already chilled by the ancient air conditioning, seemed to chill my spine from the inside out. My heart pounded so hard the pen slipped from my hand. I slowly looked in the direction he indicated. And there, where yesterday there had been only an empty, dusty chalkboard, now, there was a face. Not just any face. It was hers. From the woman I swore I would never see again. The same figure that made me lose sleep years ago, when we still lived in the old house. She had come back. But no one else seemed to see it. People walked past the painting as if nothing were there. Just my grandson and I. Transfixed, I knew in that moment that something bigger than me was happening. And if I didn't take some action, it could be too late. But it didn't start there. Before that day, I was already being slowly erased. My name is Ruth, I'm 72 years old, and I've been ignored by my own family for a long time. After my husband died, my son, the only one I had left, distanced himself as if my grief were a nuisance. "You're strong, Mom. You've been through worse," he'd say, as if that would stop me from suffering, put me aside. And if it weren't for my grandson Eli, I think I would have already disappeared from their memory. That day, we went to vote together, just him and I. I dressed up with care, a light blue blouse, a scarf around my neck, comfortable shoes, as if it were a special occasion. For me it was. It was one of the few times I left the house without feeling like a burden. But when I saw that painting, everything changed. I didn't know at that moment that that image was about to turn my life upside down. That face would bring to light a family secret forgotten for generations. And that, yes, I would have the chance to turn this game around. But not without pain. Not without facing ghosts, real and invisible. Because what began as a simple whisper from my grandson would become such a profound revelation, that to this day I tremble just remembering it. And the worst part? That woman's face was not strange. I had seen her before. I in the house where I grew up. I in the nursing home where my grandmother was forgotten. I in the reflection of the mirror, when I felt like I was slowly disappearing. But before I tell you how it all happened, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt like someone tried to erase you from their own history, subscribe here on the channel and comment where you are watching from. There are many people out there living this same pain in silence, and maybe this story is what they need to hear today. And that morning, as everyone went back to their normal lives, I held Eli's hand and approached the painting. The room got colder. The light, weaker. And his voice rang out again, very softly. "She only appears to those who have been forgotten, Grandma." I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I knew the past had returned, and it wanted to be heard. I lost the love of my life on a silent Sunday morning. It's been 8 years, but I still hear the sound of the clock stopping, as if time had collapsed along with George's last breath. We were together for almost 50 years. We married young, raised our son with everything we had. Love, discipline, values. Those things that now seem forgotten. He was my foundation. When he was gone, it was like losing my footing. And no one prepared my heart for the loneliness that came after. My son, Daniel, moved to another state 2 months after the funeral. He said he needed to start over. I get it. I swear I get it. But that didn't stop the silence from growing. First, he called every week. Then, only on holidays. And now, if a whole month goes by without a single message, it's no surprise to me. The house became too big. Time too long. Memory too heavy. I tried to fill the gaps. I crocheted, I gardened, I went to church 3 times a week. But none of these things took the place of him, or George, or Daniel. What hurt most wasn't his physical absence. It was the way he spoke to me on the few occasions he called. As if he were fulfilling an obligation. As if I were a burden. But then Eli came, my ray of sunshine in human form, my daughter-in-law's son from a previous marriage. But he calls me Grandma with an affection that melts away any pain. He comes to visit me every other Sunday. Daniel doesn't always show up. In fact, he almost never does. But Eli's mother respects me and lets me stay with him because she knows how much he does me good. Eli is curious and sensitive. He feels things. Much more than people realize. Sometimes I think he sees beyond what meets the eye. And that day, when he told me that she was back, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't just a child seeing shadows, it was a warning. But before that, life had already been warning me in other ways. More subtle warnings, point one of those that we ignore, because we believe it's just time passing. Like the pain in your chest when the phone doesn't ring, when you hear neighbors talking about their family weekend, and you pretend to be in a hurry just so you don't have to say you spent Sunday alone. Loneliness has a scent that settles in the house and in the soul. And I was already used to him. Until Eli arrives, he started asking me about the past. About my childhood. He asked me to look at old photos. He wanted to know what the world was like when I was a child. We laughed, made fritters, and watched the same old movies George loved. And little by little, I felt there was a chance for reconstruction. Not with Daniel perhaps, but with Eli. He saw me. And it was in this process, in this silent exchange between generations, that something began to awaken. Not just on me, but on the house too. Things that had been stored away for decades began to reappear, a box of letters from my grandmother, an album hidden behind the closet, cassette tape with her voice, something I didn't even remember existed. Eli was there when we found him. And he said something that made me freeze. "She looks like me, doesn't she, Grandma?" I looked at that faded photo of my grandmother. And saw it. I saw the same attentive gaze, the same expression of someone who carries truths the world chose to forget. My grandmother was abandoned in a nursing home by her own son. She spent the last few years alone, forgotten. Exactly how I was starting to feel. It was as if time had turned around, as if that face in the painting, which appeared out of nowhere, was saying, "You will not repeat my story." But to understand what was really going on, I needed to dig deeper. Much deeper. And that's when the revelations began. Even with the TV on, the house seemed to whisper to itself. The talk shows filled the room with excited voices and rehearsed applause, but inside me, it was as if time had stopped. It wasn't just the sound that was missing. It was the meaning. The reason to get out of bed, to open the windows, to prepare a hearty lunch. The days were too long, and the nights were even louder, but not with human voices. With memories. George's chair was still there, on the porch. No one else sat in it, and I wouldn't let anyone touch it. It was our place. I would spend hours in that corner, holding a cup of tea that was getting cold without me noticing, watching the gate as if waiting for someone who, deep down, I already knew wouldn't come. The landline phone, that old model with the coiled cord, stood there like a totem of hope and frustration. Tea rang sometimes, but it was always a mistake. Telemarketing, incorrect billing, people looking for the old number. It was never Daniel. Never. The routine began to turn into a kind of emotional captivity. I would wake up, make the same coffee, wipe the table, and sit down to leaf through the family albums like someone studying a book from another life. There were the smiles that were once real. Daniel as a little boy, in the garden with George. The birthday cake with runny frosting that I tried to make myself. The trip to the countryside, all crammed into the old card. I looked at all that and thought, where did we get lost? I wasn't a bitter woman. I never was. But I began to realize that as the years went by, I became invisible. It wasn't all at once. It was little by little. First, you are no longer consulted about anything. Then their opinions are treated as exaggeration. Until one day, you speak. And no one listens anymore. The cruelest part is that no one does this with malice. It's the pace of modern life, they say. The rush. The responsibilities. But the name for this is abandonment. It's you being alive, breathing, having thoughts, memories, feelings, and yet, being treated as if you had ceased to exist. Behind the scenes of my routine, there was a muffled scream. But I smiled when Eli arrived, and it made me believe I still mattered. He didn't see me as a hindrance. He called me to play, asked for stories, lay on my lap without rushing. He was the one who got me back into real cooking and into cleaning the house with a passion. Tea was only for a few hours, but it was life. Yet when he left, the silence returned. The television, even at high volume, couldn't compete with the feeling of absence. I couldn't even hear the presenter's words anymore. It was just noise. And sometimes, it seemed to me that the noise was coming from the house itself. The doors made different creaking sounds at night. The hallway mirror started to fog up even without steam. And I found myself, more than once, smelling lavender, like the one my grandmother used on her sheets, even though I hadn't had lavender in the house for years. I started writing these things down in a little notebook hidden in my nightstand drawer. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I needed to register. Because deep down, I felt something was moving, as if the empty spaces in that house were being occupied, little by a presence that wasn't mine, nor Eli's. It was something old, familiar, but forgotten. Almost like a memory that came back to demand something that was left unfinished. Eli started asking about my grandmother Ida's letters. I didn't even remember they still existed. But he insisted. He said he dreamed about her. And one afternoon, while I was cleaning the top of the hall closet, they appeared. Dusty, yellowed, but whole. I picked up the lighter envelope, opened it carefully, and began to read. The handwriting was firm, and the first sentence made my hands tremble. If you're reading this, it's because time gave you the chance I didn't have. I had no idea at the time the impact those words would have. But one thing I knew, my silent routine would never be the same after those letters. And maybe I would never have been as seen as I was about to be. That Sunday started like any other. Cloudy skies, chilly air, even with the end of winter already knocking on the door. Eli and I left the house early, wearing light coats and umbrellas, just in case. It was municipal voting day, and even though no one else in the family cared, I never missed voting. George said it was one of the few rights a woman couldn't be taken away, and I held that value like someone carrying a precious secret. Eli wanted to go with me. He said he found it fun to watch serious adults filling out paperwork. He loved watching it all. The community church hall was set up as usual. Small tables with blue plastic tablecloths, sealed ballot boxes in the corner, volunteers with name tags, and that familiar smell of weak coffee and polished floors. But right at the entrance, Eli shook my hand tightly and frowned. "Grandma, why is it so cold in here?" It wasn't like this before. I felt it too. A cold wind that seemed to come from nowhere, and that didn't suit the enclosed space with no open windows. But I did what every grandmother does at these times. I smiled reassuringly and told him it must be the air conditioning being too strong. He didn't answer. He became serious. His small, alert eyes began to scan the room as if searching for something they couldn't name. I signed my name in the voting book, took the ballot, and approached the booth. It was at that exact moment that he pulled my arm and whispered, "Don't look now, but she's back. She's there in the painting." My body froze. Not with fright, with recognition. I knew who he was talking about. I just didn't want to admit it. I turned slowly, my heart racing. And there it was. The painting DT was supposed to be empty, as always. An old frame, with opaque glass and a worn fabric backing. It sat next to the side door, always neglected. But that day, there was something in there. It wasn't a painting, it wasn't a photo, it was like a shadow. A subtle outline of a face, of eyes, of presence. And for a second, I saw it. I saw the same look in my grandmother's photo. Only now, staring at me. I blinked. The image disappeared. But the cold remained. And Eli, still with his hand in mine, looked at me as if he knew exactly what I was feeling. I did what needed to be done. I voted quickly. I handed in the paper. I smiled at the volunteer as if everything was normal. But inside, something had changed. The air seemed thicker. People, further away. Time, slower. We walked home in silence. Eli only broke the silence when we were entering the gate. "She doesn't seem angry, Grandma. Just sad." I didn't know what to answer. That presence wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't the figment of an old mind, nor the imagination of a sensitive child. It was a hidden truth that was finally stirring, like a forgotten memory that decides to knock on the door of consciousness. And there was something in that sadness that pulled at me, as if asking for reparation. As if saying, "Hear me." I kept that to myself for a few hours. I made Eli's snack, put on a cartoon for him to watch, and went to my room. I opened the nightstand drawer and took out the little notebook where I had been recording everything since the strange things started. I wrote it down calmly. Sunday. Voting. Eli saw the painting. So did I. There was a face. It looked like her. The cold was real. She wants something. I took a deep breath. I closed the notebook. And there, alone in my room, with the distant television echoing in the living room, I realized that maybe this wasn't all just about me. Maybe it was about my lineage. About choices made before I was even born. About unresolved decisions, silenced voices, names erased from a family's history. It was a journey that did not choose me by chance. I needed to understand, I needed to remember. And, above all, I needed to face what was to come. The phone rang. I got scared. I answered with a shaky voice. She was the coordinator of the community center. She looked nervous. "Ms. Ruth, did you see anything strange in the salon today?" Mr. Marcus felt sick near that old painting. He said he saw a figure. That he felt a chill down his spine. "He's in the hospital now, but he's fine." My hand went cold. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Eli. Other people were being affected. And there, with the phone still to my ear, I felt that the face in the painting wasn't going away anytime soon. Not until something was brought to light. And I knew deep down that I was the only person capable of doing this. The next day, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I made coffee, set the table, and put the silverware back in its usual place. Eli had already returned home, and the silence of my life filled everything again. But the feeling, it didn't go away. You know when something lingers in the air, like an old perfume, a memory that won't go away? It was exactly like that. And no matter how much I tried to rationalize, that image of the painting wouldn't leave my mind. It was as if it had been imprinted on my eyes, a blur of presence, an almost human form, yet without definition. Just a figure, with eyes that, for a brief second, looked back at me. I tried to convince myself it was just a poorly cast shadow, maybe the light reflecting off something. But deep down, I knew better. And worst of all, Eli saw it before me. That gave me the chills. Because children don't carry the same mental bonds we adults do. They don't filter. They feel. They perceive. And the fact that he saw it first, that he said with such certainty that she's back, affected me in a way that's hard to explain. Late in the afternoon, I returned to my notebook. I wrote calmly, trying to organize my feelings. Monday. A feeling of constant presence. As if something were watching me. The air feels heavier in the house. The clock is louder than usual. Impossible to forget the face that appeared in the painting, even if it disappeared immediately afterward. A frozen second. Just a second. But it was real. After that, I went to the hall closet. Upstairs, in an old cardboard box, were my childhood photos. I looked for one in particular, my grandmother Ida and I, sitting on the steps of her house, in our Sunday best. I found the photo. And when I looked at her face, my body froze. It was the same look. The same subtle curve in the lips. The same feeling of presence. The figure in the painting was her. I had no doubts now. And it was then that a strange certainty began to form within me. My grandmother was trying to tell me something. Something left unresolved. Something perhaps no one else wanted to hear. A hidden truth trapped between generations, and which now, somehow, chose this moment, this phase of my life, to emerge. But why? Why now? Why through me? I sat in the armchair with the photo in my hands and tried to recall what I knew about her life. I remembered that she was a very serious woman. That she wore dark dresses and wore lavender perfume. That she loved classical music and that no one would sit in her chair. But I also remembered something my mother had once said, somewhat unintentionally, during dinner. Your grandmother died alone in a nursing home. We didn't want to tell you everything. It was too much for a little girl. I never asked what this everything was. But now, everything seemed to start to connect. Perhaps the silence in the house wasn't just loneliness. Maybe it was echo. Echo of erased voices, of stories never told. And of a forgotten woman who, for some reason, had found a way to manifest herself, even if only for a second, frozen, in the background of a forgotten painting. In the following days, I started paying attention to everything. The painting was there, as always, on the same wall in the community hall. I returned one morning, disguising my curiosity under the pretext of donating clothes. I stared at it. It was empty, but something in him had changed. The frame looked darker. The glass, cleaner. And the reflection seemed too deep for something so simple. I stood there for a few minutes. And then, just as I was about to turn to leave, I felt that same chill creep up my back, a shiver that didn't come from the weather, it came from inside. I returned home and, this time, took everything out of the memory box. Letters, photos, notes. I wanted to retrace every piece of my grandmother's life. Know who she was before she was left alone. What she thought. What she felt. It was as if I was reconstructing not only her story, but my own as well. And with each piece, her presence seemed to grow a little closer. That night, I went to bed early. But I woke up to a dry sound, as if someone had dropped a wooden object. I got up slowly, went to the living room, and there it was. The frame with my grandmother's photo lying on the floor, face down. I picked it up carefully. No broken glass. No cracks. But on the back of the photo, a date I had never noticed before. 1946, the same year she disappeared from the city for 2 months, according to the family legend that no one has ever been able to explain properly. I sat on the sofa, I looked at the board, I looked at the photo. And I understood that this was no coincidence. It was called. It was time to face what had always been swept under the rug of our history. That same week, things started to spiral out of control. And I'm not speaking metaphorically. Something in the energy of the house shifted, as if a portal had opened right in the middle of the living room. And it wasn't imagination. It was physical, tangible. I saw it. I felt it. The morning after the frame fell, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. Everything seemed in its place, until I passed through the hallway and noticed that the picture on the wall, the same one that had always been there since George hung it with a double nail, was now hanging in another corner, on the opposite side. How? Who moved it? I live alone. I've never moved that picture in all these years. At first I thought it might be my memory playing tricks on me, that I'd gotten confused. But when I returned to the room that night, it was back in its original place. And then there was no doubt. Something was moving that painting without my hands. And it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the vibration of a passing car. It was intentional. I started leaving small objects near the frame. A paperclip, a pen, a dried flower. All as a test, like someone setting invisible traps. And each morning, whatever I left there simply disappeared. Or reappeared elsewhere in the house. Once, I found the flower inside the refrigerator. The pen, inside the laundry tub. On the third night, I woke in the middle of the night to the clear sound of footsteps. It wasn't the sound of wood creaking in the cold. It was rhythmic, light, and shuffling. Like someone walking slowly, but with direction. My room was dark, the curtains swaying subtly, even with the window closed. I got up, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. But the wall clock, the old one, inherited from my mother, was stuck at 3:17. It didn't make sense. It was new. The battery had been replaced a few days ago. I went back to bed trying to ignore it, but the sound of footsteps still echoed in my head, like a whispered warning between sleep and wakefulness. On Sunday, Eli came to spend the day with me. And he was the one who completely pulled me out of my denial. We were drawing at the kitchen table, as we always did. He loved doodling random things. Superheroes, houses, trees. But that afternoon, he drew a woman. Without me saying anything. Without context. A woman with a bun on top of her head, a dark dress, and big, sad eyes. Beside her, a child. He handed me the paper and said matter-of-factly, "She told me you forgot about her. But she didn't forget about you." The pen fell from my hand. My heart stopped for a second. I tried to smile, feign mild curiosity. "Who's that, Eli?" He looked at me with the brutal simplicity that only a child can have. "She spoke to me while you were sleeping. She said she was your grandmother. She didn't want to scare you, she just wanted to be heard." In that moment, all the logic I'd tried to maintain within me went out the window. How could he know? I'd never spoken to Eli about my grandmother. I'd never shown him any photos. I'd never mentioned her name. I'd always kept that part of the story hidden inside me, locked away, silenced. But now, she was back. Somehow, for some reason, she was there. And not just for me anymore. The most disturbing thing wasn't the haunting. It was the emotional intelligence of that presence. There was no malice in what was happening. There was pain. A pain carried by decades. Of oblivion. Of injustice. Eli continued drawing, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. In each new drawing, a different detail emerged. In one, the woman held a letter. In another, she sat in a rocking chair, against a gray background. In all of them, the eyes were the most striking feature. Large, open, watchful, almost as if they were staring right at me from the page. I began saving each drawing. I catalogued them with dates. They were becoming clues. Fragments of a memory that wasn't mine, but somehow, had chosen me to be rebuilt. And every night that followed, the signs grew clearer. The lights would flash briefly at the same time. The clock's chime would stop at exactly 3:17. And the painting kept shifting. Now it tilted slightly to the left, always to the left, as if pointing to something I didn't yet understand. I sat on the porch one of those nights, wrapped in my shawl, chamomile tea in my hands, and spoke out loud for the first time. "Ida, if it's you, I'm listening. I'm here. Show me what I need to know." It was the first time the house seemed to respond clearly. A gust of wind blew through the room, even with all the doors closed. The scent of lavender filled the air. And in that instant, I knew. The journey was no longer about the past. It was about what the past had to teach us, before it repeated itself. That night, after the scent of lavender faded and silence returned to fill every corner of the house, I sat there on the porch, my heart heavy and my mind racing. A part of me still wanted to believe it was all just nostalgia mixed with loneliness. That perhaps my mind was making connections where there were none. But the woman's gaze in Eli's drawings, the movement of the painting, the clock always stopping at the same time, the scent of my grandmother's perfume, everything pointed to something greater. Something that existed before me, but now chose me to be seen. And it was there, under the dim light of the street lamp, that I began to remember things I myself had forgotten. Fragments, loose details, like pieces of an old puzzle that suddenly begin to fit together. My grandmother Ida. Strong, yet silent. A woman who always seemed to hold something in her eyes. She didn't say much. She did everything with precision. She sewed without missing a stitch, made coffee without needing to taste. And at the same time, she carried a melancholy on her face that I couldn't name as a child. I remembered a rainy afternoon, when I must have been about 7, when I went to visit her house with my mother. While they were talking in the kitchen, I hid behind the living room chair, playing with a piece of paper. It was there that I accidentally overheard my mother whisper something that I've never forgotten, even though I only understood it years later. She never forgave me, you know, for letting that happen. At the time, I didn't understand. But now, it all made sense. I returned to my notebook and began writing compulsively. It was as if opening those memories had released a flood of buried truths. I remembered that, shortly before she passed away, my mother had been in a strange mood for weeks. She spoke in disjointed sentences. She talked to herself. She seemed haunted by something. On the last day we were together, she held my hand tightly and said, "What I did to Grandma, I hope you never have to know." But now I knew. I went to the box of old documents. There were the family records, certificates, letters, photos, and an envelope I'd never seen before. On it was the name of a place I'd vaguely heard of, St. Agnes Elderly Home. An asylum. The same city. The same year as the fallen photo. My stomach churned. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an admission form signed by my mother. And below, in small print, the handwritten observation field. Confused patient, unstable behavior, emotionally isolated. My heart sank. Ida wasn't admitted by choice. She was sent. silenced, hidden, classified as confused, because she said things that weren't appropriate. Because she felt too much. Because she might have seen what no one wanted to see. And if what Eli had said was true, that she didn't want to scare, just to be heard, then it was all part of a plea for justice. Not legal justice, but emotional justice. The kind of justice that can only be achieved when the truth is finally acknowledged. The pain of abandonment. It doesn't end with the one left behind. It spans generations. It settles in family silences, in words never spoken, in portraits turned to the wall. And sometimes it finds a way back, even if it's through a painting, a child's drawing, a scent in the middle of the night. I spent the next few days immersed in this journey. I began researching the asylum's records. I discovered that it had been closed over 30 years ago, following allegations of neglect. No one talked about it. It was as if the city had erased this chapter of history, like ripping a page out of a book and pretending it never existed. But I couldn't pretend anymore. I went to the site, or what was left of it. It was an abandoned lot, overgrown with tall weeds and surrounded by an old police tapestry. An elderly man who lived nearby told me that after the closure, many people swore they heard voices coming from there. Whispers, footsteps, crying. And that it was always at the same time. 3 in the morning. 3:17, to be exact. The same time as my watch. I returned home with a strange feeling. As if, by stepping into that place, I had unlocked something. And that night as I lay down, I closed my eyes with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Ida was showing me the way. And perhaps what she needed most was for someone to tell her story. Not as a woman forgotten in a nursing home, but as someone who lived, felt, loved, and was erased. And who now wanted to exist again. The next morning, as I tidied the kitchen with the window open and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the house, I felt something different inside me. It was as if the emptiness that had haunted me for years had receded. Not disappeared, but retreated, like a shadow that knows it no longer dominates everything. I was no longer the same. Something inside me had awakened. A kind of consciousness that no longer allows us to accept silence as an answer, nor invisibility as fate. Ida didn't return just out of longing. She returned to remind me what it means to be a woman in a world that erases our stories as soon as we cease to be useful. And I decided, right then and there, between cups of coffee, that the cycle would end with me. I wouldn't continue to be the next one forgotten. Nor would I allow my grandmother's past to die with me. The time for silence was over. Eli arrived later that Sunday with a smile on his face and a new drawing in his hands. This time, the woman in the painting, Ida, was smiling. Still serious, still firm, but with a new sparkle in her eyes. She said, "You're doing it right now, Grandma," he told me with the same naturalness of someone saying what they want at breakfast. I just nodded, my eyes welling up. Because, deep down, I felt it was true. This was all more than a supernatural mystery. It was a call to transformation. I picked up the phone, after years of wondering whether I should or not. I called Daniel. The call went to voicemail. I tried again. And this time, he answered with a muffled, hurried voice, as if speaking out of obligation. But I got straight to the point. "Daniel, we need to talk. And it won't be half-hearted. You need to hear everything." Silence on the other end. Heavy breathing. "Now's not a good time, Mom." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. Then pick a time. But this time, I won't accept being pushed into a corner as if I were invisible. I know what happened to your grandmother. And I know what's happening to me. The difference is, I'm still alive. And you'll listen to me. He didn't respond right away. But something in my voice resonated. For the first time in years, I felt like he understood that leaving me waiting for an answer wasn't an option anymore. That night he texted me, "I'll be over tomorrow. No excuses." And while I waited for that meeting, I was overcome by an impulse I didn't even know where it came from. I wrote my story. In detail. From my childhood with Ida to the present day. with Eli seeing and feeling what I myself had tried to hide for decades. I wrote without fear, without filter, like someone pouring their soul onto paper. And I took this text to the community center, where some ladies meet every Wednesday to talk, knit, drink tea, and complain about life. That week, I asked to speak. I stood up, read my text, and for the first time in a long time, I saw wide eyes staring at me, not with pity, but with respect, with identification. I saw heads nodding in agreement, hands reaching to mouths in astonishment, silent tears streaming down the faces of those who always thought they carried this pain alone. When I finished, one of them, the quietest of the group, named Mildred, stood up and said, "You said something I never had the courage to say. My mother died in a nursing home too. We thought it was the best thing for her. But to this day, I dream about the look she gave me on her last day. That look haunts me." Others began to speak, to tell, unearthing truths hidden out of shame, convenience, or fear of appearing weak. But there, in that small room smelling of banana bread and stale coffee, a movement was born, a collective courage that I was no longer alone. And, more importantly, Ida was no longer alone either. The feeling that accompanied me as I left that meeting was one of a mission in progress. I knew I still had a long way to go. That ghosts don't disappear just because they're acknowledged. But I also knew that fear had shifted. Before, it had paralyzed me. Now, it drove me. That late afternoon, I sat on the same porch bench where it all began. Eli drew beside me, silently. The wind brought the subtle scent of lavender again, but this time without the chill. It was as if that presence were now at peace, watching from afar, satisfied with the steps being taken. I looked up at the sky, which was beginning to take on golden hues, and whispered, "If you came back, it was to wake me up. And now, no one will silence me anymore." And perhaps this is the hidden power in all the women who have been erased. When the truth finds a voice, it never stops. It spreads. It transforms. It heals. And somehow it crosses time. Daniel arrived late in the afternoon. He didn't say the exact time, but something in me knew even before I heard the car pull up. The sound of the key turning in the gate, his slower than usual footsteps, the way he took a few seconds to knock. When I opened the door, I found a tired man. Not just physically, but emotionally drained. His eyes, always so full of certainty and haste, now held a weight I hadn't seen since his father died. He entered silently. He looked around as if he recognized a place and yet felt like a stranger. I let him take his time. I went to the kitchen, made 2 cups of tea, and returned, slowly sitting in the armchair across from him. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes. Just the sound of the clock ticking away, and that silence that doesn't hurt, but invites. "I lost the company's most important contract last week, Mom." His voice was low. After that, the delays and layoffs started. And to top it all off, Eli got sick at school. Nothing serious, but when I got to the hospital, he asked about you. He said he dreams about you almost every night, and that there's something only you can solve. My heart sank. It wasn't revenge I felt. There was no satisfaction in seeing my son broken. What there was sadness. A deep regret that it took him so long to see me. Not as a mother, but as a woman, as a person, as a living story. You were always quick to move on, Daniel. And I was too slow to stop your rush. He looked at me, without defending himself, without justifying himself. He just listened. I won't spend the last years of my life explaining myself, or asking for love. I want something simple: respect, presence, truth. He lowered his head, his eyes welling up. "I'm sorry, Mom. I thought I was protecting you from more pain. But deep down, I was protecting myself from dealing with my own guilt." The impact of those words was deeper than he could have imagined. Because what hurts isn't just the abandonment, it's the lack of awareness of it. It's seeing that you've been forgotten and then hearing that it was for your own good. It reopens old wounds, those that come from a generation that learned to love in silence, to suffer in silence, to demand nothing. But there, sitting in my living room with my son in front of me, I knew something was changing. What he was offering me wasn't an apology. It was an awakening. A reconnection with his own origins. With the truth he'd tried to hide from himself. We talked for hours. We talked about Ida, how everything began to unfold, the letters, Eli's drawings. Daniel listened in silence, sometimes shocked, sometimes moved. For the first time, I saw him truly trying to understand. Not to justify the past, but to accept what could be done from now on. I told him everything I'd learned about the asylum, about how my grandmother was silenced, about the pain that had crossed generations until it reached me. And he, with red eyes, said something that took me by surprise. Maybe she chose me too, Mom. Maybe I have to make amends with you, but also with Eli. Because if this cycle continues, he'll grow up thinking that a good man is one who disappears. And I don't want that for him. It was the first time I saw Daniel not as the son who left, but as the man who was returning. Maybe late, maybe hurt, but returning. He spent that night at home. He slept in the guest room. Eli arrived the next day and ran into his father's arms with a smile I hadn't seen in months. "Are you back to stay, Dad?" Daniel looked at me before answering. And I just nodded, as if handing over the baton. It was now his responsibility to stop the legacy of absence. The transformation that began with me, I needed to continue. It wasn't enough to wake up. It was necessary to act. Lost time is irreversible. But what you do with the time you have left, that changes everything. Your mindset, the structure of your relationships, the way you treat those who came before you. Ida didn't want revenge. She just wanted to be remembered. And perhaps more than that, she wanted to be recognized as someone who existed, who loved, who was hurt, and who, even so, never stopped being around. As if waiting for the right moment to be heard. The right moment to finally rest. Since that conversation with Daniel, the days passed with a new weight, but it was a different weight, lighter, cleaner. The house was still the same, the furniture hadn't moved, the portraits remained on the walls, but something in me had changed irreversibly. It wasn't just about me anymore, nor about my grandmother's past. It was about everything that crosses generations unsaid. About the silence that, over time, becomes a muffled scream. And I didn't want to whisper anymore. Ida's pain, buried for so long in our family's collective memory, had now transformed into movement, into words, into actions, and also into choices. Because what became clearest throughout this entire process was that no one is condemned to repeat the history they were given. There is always a chance to rewrite what comes next, as long as we have the courage to look at what came before with open eyes and a whole heart. That woman who for decades was reduced to a name on a hospital sheet was now a presence. Not the kind that scares, weighs heavily, or seeks revenge. She was now a symbol. Of resistance, of dignity, of everything that was denied her in life. And if there was anything I could do for her, besides remembering, it was to live with awareness. To do things differently. To be a bridge between what was silenced and what can still be said. Daniel started coming back to the house. Sometimes just for lunch. Other times, to pick up Eli and sit with me for a few minutes, hearing about my day. Small gestures, but for someone who's lived in absence, they're huge. And it was on one of these visits, while we were having tea on the porch, that something happened. Eli ran up to me with his sketchbook in hand, his eyes shining like someone carrying an important discovery. "Grandma, look." He opened to the last, freshly drawn page. It was the same painting as always, the same frame. But now, the woman's face was different. She was smiling. A small, almost shy smile, but one that left no doubt. Her eyes, which had previously seemed sad, now held a gleam of relief. She smiled. "Grandma. She's at peace now." I couldn't hold back the tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, too. Of gratitude. Because in that moment, I understood that the journey was accomplishing what it needed to accomplish. Ida no longer needed to scream through shadows, paintings, or stopped clocks. Her story had been told. Her pain acknowledged. And that changes everything. The painting on the wall never moved again. Nor did the footsteps return during the early hours. The clock, the one that always stopped at 3:17, resumed its normal operation, as if time had begun to flow again. As if now it were free to move on. And I, from my place as a grandmother, a woman, a daughter, and a granddaughter, learned something I'll never forget. Life gives back what you give. Even when you think no one's watching. Even silences return. Even emptiness speaks. Everything finds a way to reveal itself. It could be in an interrupted conversation, a forgotten gesture, or a child's drawing. But the truth, it always finds a way. Now, when I look back at my story, I see scars. Many. But I also see strength. I see a transformation that didn't come easily, but that came whole. And I know this doesn't end with me. Because when a woman rises, aware of who came before her, she carries much more than her own name. She carries a legacy. And what was pain becomes direction. Ida's face remains there, framed by memory, but without regret. Without frightening. Just existing. With dignity. With truth. And just that, is already more than many people have had the chance to have. If you've made it this far with me, perhaps this story touched you in some way. And if it did, it's because you too feel that there are things that can no longer remain silent. Stories that need to be seen, remembered, honored. This channel is exactly for that. To give voice to what has been forgotten, to transform silence into connection. If this content resonated with you, made you think differently, or reminded you of someone, subscribe to the channel. There's still a lot we'll experience and share together here. And tell me in the comments, write, "This message was for me," if you stayed with me until the end. I always read everything with care, and that's how I know there are people on the other side who feel the same way I do. If you want to leave your like, it will be a nice way to seal this exchange we just had. And there's a video right here that complements this conversation. Click and continue with me there. I think you'll feel right at home there too.